Forget about last night. It never happened. Vivian Sinclair asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She sat upright on the penthouse bed, still wrapped in the sheets, watching the black man by the window button his janitor's uniform with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. The envelope of cash on the nightstand sat untouched between them like an accusation neither one knew how to answer. Elijah Coleman had come up to this floor to clean the room after her party. He never planned to stay. Neither of them planned any of this, but plans had stopped mattering somewhere around midnight, and now the morning light was asking questions neither of them was ready for. Elijah Coleman did not take the elevator. He never did. The freight lift at the back of Meridian Holdings' downtown tower was slower, noisier, and smelled like cleaning solution and old metal, but it was the one he was allowed to use during his shift. He punched the button for the 40th floor and leaned against the wall with his cart listening to the cables groan above him. It was past 2 o'clock in the morning. The party on the executive floor had ended an hour ago, and his supervisor had pulled him aside with a look that said, this wasn't a request. Someone needed to clean up the presidential suite before the building's regular staff arrived at 6. That someone was Elijah. He had been working the night shift at Meridian Holdings for 14 months. Not because he wanted to not, because it was the only job he could find, but because the overnight differential paid 30% more than the day rate, and 30% was the difference between covering his mother's medication and not. Della Coleman had been in and out of Bellwood General for the better part of a year, her heart giving out in increments. The doctors measuring her decline in numbers, Elijah had learned to read the way other men read stock tickers. Her surgery had been scheduled twice and postponed twice each time because the insurance company found a new reason to deny coverage. The total cost if paid out of pocket was a figure that Elijah had written on a piece of paper and folded into his wallet so he would never forget what he was working toward, $47,000. He checked it every time he thought about quitting. The suite on the 40th floor was larger than Elijah's entire apartment. He had been up here once before months ago to fix a ventilation issue, and he remembered the floor-to-ceiling windows and the way the city looked from that height, organized clean like a problem that had already been solved. Tonight the room was different. There were half-empty champagne flutes on every surface, a catering cart still parked beside the wet bar, and one very expensive shoe lying alone in the middle of the carpet. Elijah started with the glasses, moving quietly the way he always did, keeping to the edges of rooms like he was trying not to disturb the air. He heard her before he saw her. A low sound from the bedroom, something between a cough and a groan. Elijah set down the tray he was holding and crossed the suite slowly. The bedroom door was half open. Vivian Sinclair was lying on top of the covers, fully dressed, one arm thrown over her eyes against the light coming in from the city below. Elijah recognized her the way anyone who worked in this building recognized her, from the framed profile in the lobby, from the all-hands email photos, from the particular way the entire floor went quiet whenever she walked through it. She was the CEO. She was 32 years old, and she ran a company with 17,000 employees, and she was currently lying sideways on a king-size bed with mascara on her cheekbone and an empty glass still loosely in her hand. Elijah backed out of the doorway and went back to the living room. He would clean what he could out here and leave the bedroom for morning. That was the logical decision. He was halfway through restacking the catering cart when he heard her try to get up and immediately knock something off the nightstand. Then silence, then a very quiet sound that he recognized without wanting to, as someone crying and trying not to. He stood in the middle of the suite for a long moment. Then he went to the small kitchen bar, filled a glass with water, and knocked on the bedroom doorframe before stepping in. Vivian turned her head toward him. Her eyes were unfocused, and her expression moved through several things quickly: confusion, irritation, embarrassment, before settling on something closer to exhaustion. Elijah set the glass on the nightstand, picked up whatever had fallen from the floor without looking at it, and turned to leave. She said something he didn't catch. He turned back. "What do you want?" she said again. It wasn't hostile. It was the voice of someone who hadn't asked that question in a long time and wasn't sure why she was asking it now. Elijah told her he was there to clean the suite. That was all. She could go back to sleep, and he would work around her. Vivian looked at him for a moment. Then she laughed quietly and without much humor and said that was the most honest thing anyone had said to her all night. The party had been full of people telling her what she wanted to hear. She had drunk too much because it was easier than listening to them. Elijah didn't respond to that. He started collecting the glasses from the bedroom surfaces, stacking them carefully so they didn't clink. Vivian watched him work. After a while, she asked him his name. He told her. She told him hers, and he said he knew, and she said of course he did. And neither of them said anything for a while after that. What happened next was not something Elijah could explain cleanly, even to himself. It started with her asking him to stay a little longer just to talk because the silence in the room was a specific kind of awful that she was tired of being alone in. It moved through a conversation that lasted longer than it should have, one where she asked him real questions and listened to the real answers, and where something in the room shifted in a way that Elijah didn't know how to account for. Vivian Sinclair was brilliant and sharp and funny in a way she seemed to have forgotten she was, and Elijah was too tired and too worn down to perform indifference. By the time she said his name again, it was not the way someone says the name of the man cleaning their room. In the morning, Elijah was standing at the window in his uniform when Vivian woke up. She looked at him and he looked at her, and both of them understood that nothing that had happened was reversible. The envelope she had left on the nightstand, he had not taken it. He did not know yet how to explain why. Vivian sat up slowly and said, "Are you going to take responsibility for me?" And Elijah had no answer for that. Not because the question was unfair, but because it was the kind of question that didn't have a clean yes or no, and both of them knew it. She was the CEO of the company he mopped floors for. He was a man who had written $47,000 on a piece of paper and kept it in his wallet. The distance between those two facts was not something either of them could talk around at 6 o'clock in the morning with the city still gray outside the windows. So Vivian did what felt safest. She told him she would handle things on her end. She thanked him. She said it had been a difficult night and that she appreciated his company. And the language she used was careful in a way that closed a door Elijah hadn't known was open. When he left, the envelope was still on the nightstand. He didn't take it. She noticed. Elijah went home, showered, changed, and drove to Bellwood General to sit with his mother for an hour before his next shift started. Della Coleman was awake that morning, which was not always the case. She was watching the window the same way Elijah had been watching it an hour ago from a different floor of a different building. And when he came in, she looked at him the way mothers look at their sons when they know something is wrong, but understand that asking directly will not get them an honest answer. He sat beside her bed and they talked about nothing in particular. The weather, the nurse who had a good laugh, the book on her nightstand that she hadn't gotten far with because her eyes tired easily now. Elijah held her hand and listened and tried not to think about the 40th floor, and mostly he failed. When he left, Della squeezed his hand once and told him to take care of himself, which was what she always said. But this time it landed differently. 3 days after that morning, Elijah got a call from a patient advocate at Bellwood General, not the insurance company directly, but someone working on Della's case who said that an anonymous third-party payment had been submitted to cover the outstanding surgical costs in full. The advocate was careful with her language, the way people are when they've been instructed to be, and she could not confirm the source. Elijah asked twice. She gave him the same careful answer twice. He sat in his car in the parking lot of a gas station and looked at the number on the paper in his wallet for a long time, $47,000. He thought about the envelope on the nightstand that he had not touched. He thought about the fact that Vivian Sinclair had noticed he hadn't touched it. He did not call her. He did not know what he would have said. The surgery was scheduled for the following Thursday. Della came through it the way Elijah had always believed she would, not easily, not without cost, but she came through. He was in the waiting room for 6 hours. He drank bad coffee and stared at the floor and did not think about Vivian Sinclair, and then thought about her constantly. When the surgeon came out and told him his mother was stable, Elijah put his face in his hands and stayed that way for a long time. And no one in the waiting room said anything because they all understood what that posture meant. He went back to work the following Monday. The 40th floor was just the 40th floor again. He used the freight lift kept to the edges of rooms and told himself that what had happened was a closed chapter. He had done what he needed to do for his mother. Whatever the cost of that was, he would carry it quietly. That was the only kind of deal a man in his position knew how to make. And maybe that is the quiet thing worth carrying out of this first stretch, that the way a person behaves when no one is keeping score tells you almost everything. He left the envelope untouched not because anyone would ever know, but because he would. That kind of decency is easy to miss and impossible to fake, and it usually belongs to the people we forget to look at. He was 3 weeks into believing that when he got on the elevator at the end of a shift and found himself standing 2 feet from Vivian Sinclair for the first time since that night. She was in a charcoal blazer with her phone in her hand, and she looked at him the way you look at someone you've been trying not to think about, with a kind of controlled recognition that gave too much away. They rode down 12 floors in a silence that said more than either of them intended. When the doors opened at the lobby, she stepped out first without speaking, and Elijah watched her go and told himself again that the chapter was closed. Except that Vivian Sinclair, who had been one of the sharpest executives in the city for the better part of a decade, who ran her calendar with military precision and never missed a meeting, had been leaving her office late every day for the past 2 weeks. She was nauseous in the mornings. She was exhausted by noon. She had a doctor's appointment that she had made under a different name at a clinic on the other side of the city. And when the results came back, she sat in her car in the clinic parking lot and read the paper 3 times before she accepted that the number she was reading was accurate. She was 8 weeks along. Vivian drove back to the Meridian Holdings Tower and went up to the 40th floor and stood in her office for a long time, looking at the city below. She had run this company through a market crash, a hostile takeover attempt, and a board restructuring that should have destroyed her. She had survived every version of hard that the business world had delivered. This was a different kind of hard. This was the kind that didn't show up on a balance sheet, and she had no framework for it. She made a decision that night alone in her office with the city dark outside the glass. She was going to keep the pregnancy. She was not going to tell Elijah Coleman. He had agreed to that night in a moment of desperation. Driven by circumstances she understood better than he knew, and dragging him back into something he hadn't signed up for was not something she was willing to do. She would manage this herself. She had managed everything else herself. There was no reason this should be any different. She believed that for about 3 more weeks until the morning sickness became something she could no longer schedule around, and the man who mopped the floors on her level started leaving a plain cup of ginger tea outside her office door every morning before she arrived. No note, no indication of who had left it, just the tea still warm in a cup from the building's basement cafeteria. Vivian picked it up the first morning and stood in her doorway looking up and down the empty corridor, and she already knew without having to ask exactly whose shift had just ended. The tea kept appearing every morning. Same cup, same spot outside her office door, always still warm, which meant whoever left it had timed their exit from the building carefully. Vivian told herself she was going to stop picking it up. She picked it up every morning. She told herself it meant nothing. She knew it wasn't nothing. Elijah had not spoken to her directly since the elevator. He moved through the 40th floor the way he always had, efficient and visible to most people. The kind of presence that high-functioning offices depend on and rarely acknowledge. But Vivian noticed things now that she hadn't before. The way he refilled the water station outside the conference room before her 7 a.m. calls without being asked. The way he left the hallway, lights at a lower setting on the mornings she had late nights. As if he understood that bright fluorescence at 6 a.m. after 4 hours of sleep was a specific kind of cruelty. He never looked at her in a way that demanded acknowledgement. He just adjusted things quietly and moved on. By the 8th week, the nausea was bad enough that Vivian had started keeping crackers in her desk drawer and leaving her office door closed in the mornings. Her assistant, a sharp young woman named Meredith, had noticed, but said nothing, which Vivian appreciated more than she could articulate. The rest of the floor had noticed too, in the way that offices notice everything sideways through the language of shifted schedules and rerouted meetings, and the particular quiet that settles over a workspace when people are watching something they haven't been given permission to discuss yet. One morning, Vivian made it as far as the hallway bathroom before the nausea overtook her. She was on her knees on the tile when the door opened, and she expected Meredith's voice or no one's. Instead, she heard the sound of someone filling a cup at the sink, and then a damp paper towel appeared over the top of the stall door held out without comment. She took it. The footsteps retreated and the door closed. Vivian stayed where she was for a moment, the cool towel against the back of her neck, knowing without question who had just walked out of that hallway. She found Elijah in the supply room off the east corridor 20 minutes later. He was restocking shelves and did not turn around when she came in, though she was certain he heard her. Vivian stood in the doorway and looked at him for a long moment before she said that she knew it was him leaving the tea. Elijah turned, then steady, meeting her eyes with the same calm that had unnerved her on the 40th floor that first morning. He said yes, it was him. She asked why. He said she looked like she needed it. Vivian folded her arms and told him he didn't have to do that. Elijah agreed that he didn't. There was a silence between them that was not uncomfortable, which was itself uncomfortable. And then Vivian told him that she was handling things and that she didn't need anyone to manage anything on her behalf. Elijah said he understood. He turned back to the shelves. Vivian stood in the doorway a moment longer than she needed to before she left. The talk started the following week. Elijah heard it first from a guy on the maintenance crew named Hank, who delivered it with the cheerful bluntness of someone who assumed everyone already knew. The story going around the building was that the janitor on the executive floor had figured out the CEO was pregnant and was using that information to get close to her, that he was maneuvering, calculating, working an angle. Hank said it without malice. The way people repeat things they find interesting rather than things they believe. But the version Elijah heard from Hank was a tame version. The one circulating in the building's group chats he understood later was considerably less generous. It is worth sitting with what the building chose to believe. The story that spread was that the man with the least power in the tower had somehow found leverage over the woman with the most, that the janitor was the one working an angle. But the arithmetic of it ran the other way entirely. He was the one with nothing to hold over anyone, giving quietly and asking for nothing, while everyone around them reached for the version of events that cost the least to imagine. That gap between what actually happened and what was simply easier to assume is where most of the harm in this story quietly did its work. He didn't defend himself to Hank. He didn't bring it up with his supervisor. He went back to the 40th floor and kept leaving the tea and carried on with his shift, the way he always had, because the alternative stopping, pulling back, letting the talk win felt like the wrong answer, even if he couldn't fully articulate why. What happened at the parking garage 3 weeks later was not something he had planned. Vivian had been in back-to-back meetings since 8 in the morning, and it was close to 10 at night when Elijah saw her walking to her car alone in the lower level. It was raining. The garage entrance was 100 feet from where she'd parked, and she didn't have an umbrella. Elijah had one, a plain black one that lived on his cart and that he used for the 5-block walk to his own bus stop. He walked over, held it above her without saying anything, and matched her pace to the car. Vivian unlocked the door, put her bag in, and then straightened up and looked at him standing in the rain, holding the umbrella at arm's length so it covered her and not him. She told him to get in out of the rain. He said he was fine. She said he was soaked, which was true. She told him she'd drive him to his stop, and he started to refuse, and she said she wasn't asking. Elijah got in the passenger seat, dripping quietly onto the leather, and Vivian pulled out of the garage without speaking for a long time. She told him about the board review while they were stopped at a red light on Marshall. She didn't frame it as asking for his input or looking for reassurance. She stated it the way she stated most things, as fact with context. The board had become aware that there were irregularities in her schedule, unexplained absences, a recent pattern of leaving meetings early. Someone had connected those absences to the rumors running through the building. The board had not asked her directly, not yet, but she could read the direction things were moving. She said all of this looking straight ahead at the traffic. Elijah listened. When she finished, he asked if the company was going to be all right. Not her, the company. Vivian glanced at him sideways. She said the company was fine. She'd managed worse than board scrutiny. He said then she already knew what she was doing and probably didn't need him to say anything. Vivian made a sound that was almost a laugh and kept driving. He got out at his bus stop and she watched him go and told herself again that she was handling this alone. She had built Meridian Holdings from a failing regional firm into a nationally recognized operation in 8 years. She had done that without a partner, without a safety net, without anyone to drive her home in the rain. One more difficult season was not going to be the thing that changed her. She drove back to her building and told herself that twice more in the elevator before she got to her floor. The prenatal appointment was at a clinic off Lowell Street, the same one she had used for her initial confirmation. She had been going alone, scheduling around board calls and investor briefings, telling Meredith she had a personal matter on those mornings, and leaving it at that. The file was in her bag when she got back to the office. She set it on her desk and turned away to take a call, and did not notice that the clasp on the bag was loose until she came back to find the folder on the floor open with the appointment paperwork facing up. Elijah had come in to replace the recycling. He was on the far side of the room with his back to the desk when Vivian came around the corner and saw the file on the floor. She picked it up quickly, but not quickly enough. The words on the top sheet were visible at a glance to anyone who had been in that room in the past 30 seconds. She looked at Elijah. He was still working, still moving steadily, and he did not turn around. But his rhythm had changed by one small beat, and Vivian had spent enough time watching this man work to know the difference. She said his name. He turned around. His expression was careful in a way that told her everything she needed to know about what he had seen. Vivian set the file on her desk and stood very straight, and said that whatever he thought he knew, she was managing the situation, and it was not his concern, and she needed him to keep what he had just seen to himself. Elijah said he would. Then he said, and Vivian would think about this sentence for a long time afterward, that she didn't have to manage it alone if she didn't want to. Vivian told him that was not something she was prepared to discuss. Elijah said he understood. He finished with the recycling and moved toward the door, and Vivian said, without quite planning to that, she had been considering a transfer, moving her primary operations to the company's branch office in Charlotte, at least for a few months. Elijah stopped walking. He did not turn around immediately. When he did, his face was composed in a way that cost him something. And Vivian recognized the cost because she had been paying it herself for weeks. He asked if that was what she wanted to do. She said it would simplify things. He said it probably would. He said a lot of things probably would. And that simplifying things and doing the right thing were not always the same direction. And he said it without any weight in his voice, just as a factual observation which made it harder to dismiss than if he'd been angry about it. Vivian said she needed time to think. Elijah said he wasn't going anywhere. She did not move to Charlotte. She told herself it was because the board needed her physically present and the timing was poor, and it had nothing to do with the man who left ginger tea outside her door every morning. None of that was entirely untrue. None of it was the whole story either. The story that ran in the financial press 3 weeks later had a headline that described Meridian Holdings' CEO as embroiled in a personal scandal involving a building employee. It did not name Elijah, but it had enough detail to make him identifiable to anyone in the building. The piece speculated about the nature of the relationship and implied that someone in the company had offered the reporter the relevant background information. Vivian's communications team did damage control within the hour. By noon, the company's stock had dropped 4%, which was not catastrophic but was visible enough to land in every board member's inbox before end of day. The board called an emergency session for Thursday. Vivian sat at the head of the conference table and listened to her directors, men and women she had recruited in some cases, personally describe the optics of the situation with the kind of clinical detachment that people use when they're saying something they know is unkind. The core of what they were telling her was simple. The company could not afford continued association between its chief executive and a member of the building maintenance staff. They were not telling her what to do privately. They were telling her what she needed to do publicly, which amounted to the same thing. She said she would take it under advisement. She meant she would handle it on her own terms and on her own timeline. She had always meant that. But for the first time sitting in that room, listening to people weigh her personal life against quarterly projections, Vivian understood that the part of her that wanted to keep handling everything alone was not strength. It was a habit. And habits, unlike decisions, could be broken by someone else before you were ready. Elijah was waiting near the freight elevator when she came out of the session. He wasn't waiting for her specifically. His shift had ended and he had his bag on his shoulder and he was heading out the way he always did through the back of the building. But he saw her come through the side corridor and he read her face the way he had learned to read it without her permission over the past several weeks. And he did not move toward her or away from her. He just stood there, present, not making it her job to manage his reaction. Vivian walked over to him. She told him what the board had said, the short version. Elijah listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked her one question. He asked if she believed that walking away from him would actually fix the thing the board was worried about, or if it would just make it easier for everyone to pretend the problem didn't exist. Vivian did not have a clean answer for that. The elevator arrived and Elijah held the door and she did not get in, and he looked at her for a moment and then let the doors close and rode down alone. She stood in the corridor for a while after that in the quiet of the building at 10 o'clock at night, and she thought about the envelope on the nightstand that he had never touched, and the umbrella held out in the rain and the tea still warm every single morning. And if I can offer one thought here in the quiet with her, it is this. What moves me in this part of the story is never the big decisions. It is the small, unasked-for things, a cup left warm on a cold morning, an umbrella held at arm's length, so it covered her and not him. People will tell you love announces itself. More often, I think it just arrives early, stays quiet, and waits to see whether you'll notice before it's asked to leave. Then she thought about Thursday's board session and the 4% drop, and the Charlotte office and all the clean, logical reasons she had been assembling for weeks to explain why the safest choice was also the right one. She was still standing there when she realized she was no longer sure those were the same thing, and that gently is the thing worth noticing. We are quick to call it strength when someone handles everything alone. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it is only fear in better clothes, and the braver, harder thing is letting one person stand close enough to help. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 6 days after the board session. Elijah was in the middle of his shift when his phone buzzed in his pocket, and he saw Bellwood General on the screen, and he already knew before he answered what kind of call it was going to be. Della Coleman had been declining for the past 2 weeks. In the slow, incremental way the doctors had warned him about, a rhythm dropping here, a fluid reading climbing there, numbers on a chart that told a story he had been reading in their faces for months. The surgery had bought time. It had not bought permanence. Elijah had understood that. He had told himself he was prepared for it. He wasn't prepared for it. He left the building without signing out. He drove to Bellwood General in the dark of 4 o'clock in the morning, and he sat with his mother for the last 2 hours of her life, holding her hand while the monitors registered what was left, and then registered nothing. The room was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when something has just departed from them, a specific and irreplaceable quality of stillness. Elijah sat in the chair beside the empty bed for a long time after the nurses came and went. He was not crying. He was past the point where that was available to him. He was just sitting with the weight of it, letting it settle into his body the way grief does when there's nowhere left for it to go. He did not go back to work that week. He called his supervisor, used the bereavement days he had never touched in 14 months, and went home to the apartment that was suddenly very quiet. Della had not lived with him. She'd had her own place across the city, a small unit she'd kept for 30 years, but she had been a presence in his life so consistent that her absence had texture. He felt it in the mornings, especially in the habit of almost picking up his phone to call her before he remembered. On the third day, he went to her apartment to begin going through her things. It was the kind of task that expands to fill however much time you give it. So Elijah moved carefully and without hurry, opening drawers and shelves with the deliberateness of someone who understood that what was in them would not be here much longer. In the second drawer of her nightstand, beneath a worn Bible and a folder of insurance documents, he found the letters. There were 6 of them, handwritten on plain white paper, in his mother's careful cursive, each one sealed with his name on the front. They were not dated, but the handwriting on the last 2 was less steady than the others, which told him roughly when she had written them. He sat on the edge of her bed and read them in order, and by the 4th one he understood what she had been doing. She had been writing to him across time, saving things she wanted to say for after she was gone, because she had known the way she always seemed to know things that he would need them more then than before. The letters were not dramatic. They were not the kind of grand farewell that would have been foreign to Della Coleman's character. They were practical and warm and honest in the way she had always been honest, without softening things that didn't need softening and without hardening things that deserved tenderness. She told him she was proud of him specifically and with examples, not as a general statement. She told him the things she wished she'd said more while she could. And in the last letter, the one with the unsteady handwriting, she wrote something that Elijah read twice before he folded it back along its creases and sat very still in the quiet of her apartment. She wrote that she had watched him carry things alone his whole life and that she understood why she had raised him. She knew where that came from, but that carrying things alone was not the same as being strong, and she wanted him to know the difference before it was too late to use it. She said she didn't know what was happening in his life right now because he had always been careful about what he told her, but she knew something was happening, and she wanted him to stop asking whether he deserved to stay and start asking whether the person in front of him needed him too. She said those were different questions, and only one of them had an answer worth living by. Elijah refolded the letter and put it in his jacket pocket. He finished going through the apartment. He drove home. He sat in his kitchen and thought about the board session he hadn't been present for, but that Vivian had described in the corridor about the choice she was being pressured toward and about the way she had not gotten into the elevator. He thought about that last part for a long time. While Elijah had been on bereavement leave, the board had moved faster than Vivian expected. She had been given a formal written request, framed as a recommendation, which was board language for a directive asking her to sever any personal connection to the employee in question and to issue a brief public statement confirming that Meridian Holdings maintained appropriate professional boundaries at all levels of the organization. The statement had been drafted for her. All it needed was her signature. Vivian sat in her office on the 40th floor with the draft in front of her and read it 3 times. It was clean and precise, and it would work. The board knew it would work. She knew it would work. A statement like this issued by her would close the press cycle within 48 hours, stabilize the stock, and return the board to something like confidence in her leadership. It would also make Elijah's position in the building untenable, which the statement did not say, and did not need to say, because everyone involved understood the implication. She did not sign it. She told herself she was waiting for a better moment, for a clearer head, for the right conditions. She worked through the week alone, going through the motions of leadership with the practiced competence of someone who had been doing this long enough to do it without full presence. Meredith left food on her desk when she forgot to eat. Vivian ate it mechanically and kept working. The tea had stopped appearing outside her door that week, which was the first external indication that something in the building had changed, and which landed harder than Vivian expected. She had not known about Della Coleman. She found out the same way most of the building found out. Meredith mentioned gently that there was a note circulating that the night janitor on the executive floor was out on bereavement. Vivian absorbed this without visible reaction and went back to her work and told herself it did not change the calculation. She knew immediately that it changed the calculation entirely. Elijah came back on a Monday. He came in through the freight entrance the way he always did, signed in, took his cart, and went up to the 40th floor. He was 20 minutes into his shift when Vivian appeared in the corridor. She was not supposed to be in the building. It was past 9 at night, and she had a morning flight to the East Coast for an investor meeting. She was in her coat with her bag on her shoulder, which meant she had come back after leaving, which meant she had turned around. She told him she was sorry about his mother. Elijah said, "Thank you." They stood in the corridor, and the building settled around them in the particular way it did at that hour, quiet and indifferent. And Vivian said she was sorry about the other thing too. The board, the pressure, the choice she had been moving toward without telling him directly. Elijah said he already knew. She asked how. He said she had stopped arguing against it, which was how he had always been able to tell when she had made up her mind about something. Vivian looked at him for a moment and then said that she had not signed the statement. Elijah did not respond immediately, and she said it again more plainly that the board had drafted a statement and given her a deadline, and she had not signed it and had no intention of signing it. Elijah asked what she was going to do instead. She said she did not know yet. He said that was honest. She said honesty was the least she owed him at this point. She asked about the letters. Meredith had mentioned something in passing about letters found in his mother's things. And Vivian asked because she wanted to understand, not because she needed something from the answer. Elijah told her about them in the spare way he told her most things without performance or self-pity, just the facts of it, and what they had clarified for him. He told her about the last letter. He did not read it to her, but he told her what it said, the core of it, the difference between carrying things alone and being strong. Vivian listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said quietly that his mother sounded like a remarkable woman. Elijah said she was without hesitation. They had been standing in the corridor for 20 minutes, and neither of them had moved toward the other or away. Vivian said she needed to tell him something and that she wanted him to let her finish before he responded. Elijah said, "All right." She said that for the past several months, she had been making decisions on his behalf without consulting him, deciding what he could handle and what he was better off not knowing and how much of this he had signed up for. And that she had told herself she was protecting him, but that the more accurate description was that she had been protecting herself from the possibility that if she gave him a real choice, a fully informed choice, he might make a different one than the one she needed him to make. Elijah listened. He let her finish. Then he said at the end that he had already made his choice, that he had made it the morning he left the envelope on the nightstand and walked out without it, and that he hadn't changed his mind since. The board session was the following Thursday. It had been scheduled as a routine governance meeting, the kind that Vivian attended in the same way she attended every obligation, prepared, controlled, already 3 steps ahead of the room. What was not scheduled was Elijah Coleman walking through the doors of the Meridian Holdings 38th floor boardroom at 9:40 in the morning in a clean shirt and the same steady expression he wore everywhere and asking to address the board. There was an objection immediately from 2 of the directors. Vivian, sitting at the head of the table, let the objection run its course and then said without inflection that she was the chair of this meeting and that she was granting the floor. The room went quiet. Elijah stood at the end of the table and did not use notes. He said he was not there to defend a relationship or to make a case for himself as someone worth the board's time. He said he understood what he was: the night janitor, the man with the cleaning cart, the person who rode the freight elevator so he didn't inconvenience the people whose floors he mopped. He said he understood exactly how that looked from where they were sitting, and he wasn't asking them to change that assessment. What he was asking was that they consider one thing separately from the rest. that Vivian Sinclair was one of the most capable people in this industry, and that the thing she had been doing for years, operating completely alone, treating self-sufficiency like it was a virtue instead of a survival mechanism, was going to cost the company more in the long run than any board optics issue. He said a person who had nobody to go home to eventually stopped going home, and that a CEO who was running on empty was not an asset. He said he was not asking them for a title or a seat or anything that belonged to them. He was asking them to stop making it harder for her to let someone in. The room stayed quiet after he finished. One of the senior directors, a woman named Eleanor Vance, who had been on the board since before Vivian's tenure, looked at him for a long moment, and then looked at Vivian and said nothing. But her expression said a great deal. Vivian, for her part, was looking at the table. Elijah thanked them for their time and walked back out. The vote on the formal statement was tabled at the end of that meeting. Eleanor Vance moved to revisit the matter in 30 days. No one objected. Vivian said she appreciated the board's consideration and moved to the next agenda item, and her voice was level and professional, and only Meredith, who had been taking minutes in the corner, noticed that her hands were flat on the table in the particular way they got when she was working very hard to hold something in. Elijah was in the lobby when she came down. She walked toward him and stopped a few feet away and said, and the lobby was not empty. There were people moving through it in both directions, and several of them recognized her, that she was done managing this alone, that she had been wrong about what a loan was worth, and that she was asking him not as something she needed from him, but as something she was choosing because she wanted to. If he was still in the same place he'd been in when he left that envelope untouched on the nightstand. Elijah said yes. He had been in the same place the whole time. Vivian nodded once, and then she did something she had not done in the 6 months since the 40th floor. She let her face do what it was going to do without managing it at first. It was not a grand gesture. It was just her expression unguarded. For the first time in longer than she could account for, and Elijah saw it and didn't look away. The stock recovered by the end of the following week. The press cycle closed not because a statement was issued, but because there was nothing left to speculate about. What had been hidden was now simply visible. A woman who ran a company and a man who showed up, and the fact of them choosing each other in full view of everyone who had been watching to see if they would. Della Coleman's last letter stayed in Elijah's jacket pocket. He didn't need to read it again. He had already memorized the part that mattered. And if there is one small thing to carry away from all of it, let it be the difference she named for him, that carrying something alone was never the same as being strong. Most of us learn that late. It helps more than you'd think to hear it while there is still time to set the heavy thing down and let someone stand beside you.